Hello there, and welcome to this presentation and webinar on teaching around grief and bereavement. My name is Joanna Feast, and I'm going to be taking you through about 30-35 minutes of hopefully useful stuff to be thinking about how you teach about grief and bereavement and how your school can prepare for those who are bereaved or in grief. Now, this training will support you with a variety of different things. First and foremost, a little bit about the definition and facts about grief and bereavement, who it affects, how it affects them, that sort of thing. Why we need to teach about grief and bereavement and how you and schools can be prepared for this, because better to be prepared than to try to do it in the moment. We'll also be looking at contextualising grief and bereavement and teaching this in an age and stage appropriate way. And then a brief outline about where this is within Jigsaw PSHE, the 3 to 11, 12 programme and the 11 to 16 programme. We'll also be looking at how grief might be expressed in different people, particularly children of different age groups, and then how we might be able to support bereaved pupils and bereaved staff whilst in school. And then finally, we're looking at how and why a bereavement policy can be very beneficial. And then you'll get a takeaway template if you attend this webinar to help you to write your school's bereavement and or grief policy. So let's get started. A little bit about me. I'm Joanna Feast. I'm a former teacher. I'm a former local authority healthy schools and SEAL lead, so that's social and emotional aspects of learning. And I'm also a Jigsaw Senior Associate Consultant, and I've been with Jigsaw from the very beginning. I've been working in health and education for over 25 years, and actually coming up to 995 schools, I think, that I've worked in and with. So hopefully I can bring some of that experience to you today. I'd like to take a brief moment to remind everyone who is here today to take care of yourself during this session. And if at any point you need to pause or stop, please do so, and do seek support if you need it. I'll try to keep this as fact-based and factual as possible, but obviously this may bring up some feelings in you or those around you, so do take care of yourself. Now, the starting point for today's webinar is this. As much as we might want to protect children from the truth about loss, about grief or bereavement, we can't and we shouldn't. It will absolutely confuse them, and it may stand to make them feel alone with their feelings, their questions, their fears, anything that might be overwhelming them. So it's better not to do that for children's sake and also for ours. We can't eliminate grief, loss, bereavement at all. It's a part of life, but we can offer children and ourselves support. A bit about the definitions then. What do we mean by these three phrases or words that we will be using today? Firstly, bereavement. This is the loss that people experience when someone close to them dies, or when they feel the loss of someone who perhaps in the public eye has died, that sense of loss. Grief, it sort of encapsulates all of the feelings and the emotions that people might experience as a result of the loss of someone close to them, or even not that close to them. And then the time that people take to grieve is called the mourning period. And when we mourn, that's when we are expressing our grief. So it may not matter to have these definitions, but I wanted to have it there just in case we need to go back to this at any point, and it can very much help with our policy writing too. A few facts and figures, hopefully useful, just so that we can bring into perspective why it's so helpful to have a bereavement and or loss policy within school. The latest figures that we have available to us say that about 127 children and young people are bereaved of a parent every single day in the UK. And added to that, we've got over 46,000 children in the UK are bereaved of a parent before the age of 18. So, quite hefty numbers. 1 in 29 children and young people between the ages of 5 and 16 have experienced the death of a parent or sibling. So to put that into perspective, that's at least 1 in every classroom. And that is why it's so important to be planning for this and to be using PSHE to help and to educate. And an estimated just over 44,000 children with special educational needs and disabilities are bereaved of a parent in the UK. So to put that into perspective as well, it's about saying that it's not just looking at children as a general group of people. It will affect people in different ways. And then every 20 minutes on average, a parent dies in the UK. So I hope that doesn't overwhelm in any way. It's more just about saying this is why we need to be prepared, because it will happen. I thought it might be useful to explore and explain a little bit about what grief might look like in children. How might it affect their behaviour? So for the very young children, a sense of loss may be felt, and they may seek out the person who has died. But obviously, intellectually, they won't necessarily be able to understand how permanent that loss is. For children slightly older, so between the ages of 2 and 4, which may include obviously children at school, they might be aware that death as a concept exists, but don't, again, necessarily understand how permanent it is, and they may think that the dead person will return. When we get into the slightly older children, 5 to 9-year-olds have a greater understanding of death in the main, and that it is permanent. They may very much struggle to understand their emotional response because they might not ever have felt anything like that previously. And those feelings may include things like fear and guilt, which can be obviously overwhelming for anybody. But for children of that age who perhaps haven't contextualized it or who haven't experienced it before, that may feel very alienating and upsetting. For children between the ages of 9 and about 12, all of this is very general. They will definitely understand the finality of death, all things being equal, and perhaps might be more aware of their own mortality, so the sense that something may happen to them. But they also may deny their feelings of loss and try to sort of get on with things because it's too difficult to experience that, and they may not feel supported in those feelings, and several other things too. Now, in the over 12s, and I'm not going to clarify this with any specific age groups, just generally maybe into adolescence, young people are very likely to grieve in similar ways to adults. So they'll experience very powerful emotions, inevitably, and they will have a very profound effect on young people, having those very strong emotions. And it may result in them questioning their identity, what it means to be them, maybe part of a family, part of a friendship group. And it may also mean at the other end of the spectrum of feelings that they may have suicidal thoughts, that those feelings are too difficult to bear and they don't see any other way out or any other means of support. Crucially, though, it's very important to remember that young people need to have normal, in inverted commas, time with friends. So to be an adolescent, to be a young person, rather than to be a grieving person. And I think that's what causes so much confusion and discomfort, is that in and out, back and forth, to and fro-ness of existence. Some of the usual grief reactions that we can expect to see, and these will be reactions as opposed to considered responses. There may be everything from difficulty attending school to having sleep difficulties. So if a child is experiencing grief, then they may feel that school is a completely useless concept to them. Why on earth would they be going? Whereas other children may feel that school offers some continuity and security. And then there will be children all the way along that spectrum of feelings. Anxiety is something I'm sure won't be a surprise to anybody to hear. And that anxiety could be from anything to they are going to die themselves or what's going to happen in their family, all of those sorts of things. A sadness, and I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge, is the feeling of sadness, not anger, not anxiety. It's the utter sadness, and so difficult to sit with for so many people, so difficult to hold that emotion. Also a longing for the person who has gone, or a longing for the life that they had, and also a missing of the life that they perhaps know they won't have. Now, I've mentioned anger already. It is important to know that anger is part of that sort of normal lexicon, as it were, of emotions that someone may experience as part of their grief response. Now, I've put in inverted commas here, acting out, because I don't actually like the phrase acting out. It's basically expressing an unmet need. Any behaviour that to perhaps an adult might look like a child or a young person is acting out is really saying, hear me, see me, I have an unmet need, please help me with it. And getting to the bottom of what that is can sometimes be a bit of a challenge, but it still needs to happen. Children and young people obviously may have difficulty concentrating, particularly on things they don't see the worth of at that specific point. And then, of course, we know that emotions are held in the body and they can have very physical manifestations. So you may have children who report more headaches, more tummy aches, more not wanting to do things, more unexplained pain in their bodies. It's not to say that we dismiss this, but we absolutely do recognise that grief can be held like any emotion in the body, and it will be manifested in that way. I think one of the most important things to say here is that many children and young people may feel a sense of grief, and that grief will come through in different ways. So that may be guilt. They feel guilty for any number of things. One of the most common ones is still being alive, that they haven't died in the place of the person who has died around them, or that they haven't died as well. And then feelings of shame and self-reproach can come in as well. And these are all really complex and very uncomfortable feelings for so many. And of course, then it's no surprise that sleep difficulties may arise too. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list by any means, but these are some of the more common reactions to grief. So some children may have different expressions of grief. They might not grieve all of the time, and that may look quite confusing for the adults around them who may be thinking, well, I thought this child was bereaved, when they're seemingly having a great time. But I think one of the most important things that I've learnt over the years is that children jump in and out of puddles of grief. Adults do this too, but it's often slightly less marked, as it were. So children could be all in with grief and then all out, and then all in and all out. And so the process goes on. And there's no definitive time, obviously, for how long that this will take. Everybody grieves in a different way. Bereavement for some children might be the absolute last thing that they can bear. So that may have an effect on their mental health, obviously. It may decline further. And there may be a range of other significant difficulties as well that are elicited as a result of the bereavement. And then what the research says is that at times of grief, when people can't hold their feelings, can't manage with their feelings, then they try to numb. And that's when someone is more likely to smoke, to vape, to drink alcohol, and to use other illicit substances, as it were, so harmful substances. I think it's important to remember all of this, but also not to panic at the same time, because grief is part of the process of life. And we just need to support children and young people as they go through this. And how do we do that? Well, there's several different ways that schools can help with this. And I think addressing bereavement as a concept is a really important way to do this. First and foremost, as part of the PSHE curriculum, that we teach around bereavement and grief. We teach what they are, when they might be experienced, what we can expect during those times, and most importantly, who to ask for help. So that's where your signposting to services come into play, but also your pastoral support and care that is part of your school life. So always remember that signposting doesn't necessarily mean outside of school. It can most definitely mean inside of school too. One of the reasons that we've put together the takeaway policy ideas for you is that we highly encourage you to have a policy about bereavement loss, maybe even critical incidents as well, so that you're fully prepared. Because in the moment, it's very difficult often to think clearly. So make sure that you think rationally outside of the bereavement process so that you can put into play the protocols when needed. And then, of course, what we need to also understand is that adults, staff, may also need some support, whatever that might look like, and we'll come on to that later. Why do we need to teach about grief? Well, very simply put, it's part of the natural process of the life cycle. It's a bit like teaching about birth, about sex and relationships. So if we didn't teach about the end of life cycle, then it would sort of be an incomplete journey, which is why we need to keep teaching that it's the part of the process of the life cycle. And in Jigsaw, how do we do this? Well, I've split that up into the 3 to 11 programme, the 11 to 16 programme. What's important to remember about Jigsaw and about any really good PSHE programme is that it includes social and emotional skills-based learning in every single lesson, not just in the lessons about bereavement and grief. We have to be teaching all of these sorts of management or coping strategies in every lesson. in a small way, so that it's not a shock when it comes in the lessons about bereavement, for example, and it's not expecting children to learn essential skills in a very difficult environment. So having said that, we do have some lessons that are specifically about bereavement and loss, and not all necessarily to do with death of someone or a pet, for example. We start in ages 8 to 9, and there are two different lessons or pieces. One about broken dreams and the disappointment and loss, and one about overcoming disappointment. So a very gentle introduction to the idea of the complexity and difficulty of feelings when things go awry. And then in Healthy Me, in the 10 to 11 age group, we've got two lessons again about emotional and mental health and managing stress and pressure. So again, looking at things looking at the skills, most importantly, of what that might feel like, and also how we can manage those feelings, not ignore them, but how we manage them well. We need to recognize that we're having them. We need to name them. We need to understand where they come from, and then importantly, how we can manage them, and then how we can see these in others as well. So it's a very stepped process. In the age 8 to 9 in relationships, again, two different pieces. And then in age 10 to 11, we've got piece 3 as well. And I will go through these in a bit more detail. And then in Changing Me as well, we've got a lesson 2 about looking ahead. We've also in the 11 to 16 programme got a couple of lessons, and I will show you those in a bit more detail too. Grief is covered in a very specific and trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive way across all Jigsaw lessons. But something that I thought was just helpful to note is that right at the start of any of these lessons that are associated with bereavement and grief and loss, there is an explanation about how to teach around this, but also how to look after yourself as a teacher. If, for example, you find this a particularly difficult subject, understandably so, be really honest and realistic with yourself and consider either postponing the lesson because it makes things uncomfortable for you. Keep yourself safe first and foremost. What we've got here are some just a couple of screenshots about piece 2 within the relationships puzzle for ages 8 to 9. I'm not going to go through these in any great detail, just so that you know that they are there, that the lesson is constructed incredibly gently and carefully around what children need. The Ask Me This part of that particular lesson doesn't talk about death, but it talks about what feelings might someone experience when they lose someone close to them. So that loss could be death, but it could also be separation, divorce, someone moving away. It's non-specific, but it allows children to think about loss in a safe way, and also in a way that prepares them for what may be to come. Crucially, though, as in all Jigsaw lessons, we do not leave children with these uncomfortable feelings. We offer them a way to manage them, and then we offer them a way to close down those feelings, as it were, as in a closing of the lesson, so that we can manage those feelings better and know that they don't always last. We use stories in Jigsaw. We have one story in particular that has been written specifically for Jigsaw. And if you don't have access to that, or you don't want to use that one, you may have other alternatives already in school. I think Badger's Parting Gifts has been around for a very long time, as has Goodbye Mousy. So you may have those around school already. What we have found is very helpful when talking with children is to explain to them the different stages that they may go through when they're experiencing loss. Now, this is based on all of the research, which we go into more detail in secondary, obviously, but we're trying to explain to children that they may feel very up and down about things, and that's to be expected. It is generalised, but it is based on a huge amount of data and a lot of research that's happened in the past decades. One of the activities that we use is Jazz's memory box. So that's a lovely activity that helps children honour the person who is no longer, or the pet who is no longer with them. And there are instructions of how to do that. So it's very much up to you how you decide to use it. We've put in what we think is best practice, we know is best practice in Jigsaw, but please do feel free to use these ideas as best work for you, not straying too far away, obviously. Moving then on to ages 8 to 9 in relationships. Excuse me a moment. Always happens when I'm presenting. I suddenly get a little tickle. In the age 8 to 9 relationships, piece 3, we talk about memories. And this is specifically about a memory box. Tammy, the dog, is no longer with Jazz, and Jazz decides to put together a memory box to help remember Tammy. So some instructions about how to do that. We move on then in ages 10 to 11 in the relationships puzzle to piece 3 about love and loss, with different activities about how children can notice how difficult certain experiences may be, all the way from moving house to breaking up with a best friend, moving to a different country, or someone leaving in the home to go to university. We use scenario cards, which is a distancing technique. And what we try to do is encourage children to see things, how that particular person in a very distanced scenario-based way may be going through the cycle of grief. Now, in the 11 to 16 programme, we name that cycle of grief, the Kubler-Ross cycle, which still stands to this day. It's quite sort of vintage research, but in the main, it still stands. For year 10, so ages 14 to 15, in Being Me, My World in Piece 2, we look at very closely at how I feel when things end. In Being Me, My World, we do talk a lot about beginnings, and I think it's important to talk about ends as well, which is why it's featured here. We've got the different responses to grief, so the physical and the mental and emotional responses, in order to explore further how children and young people may experience things. And of course, these lists are not exhaustive, and it's about saying not everybody will experience grief in the same way. Really important to say that these responses are completely natural and to be expected. And as I've already mentioned, everyone grieves in a different way. Important, I think, to also distance this in how to support someone who is grieving. Now, this may be a very practical, sort of on the nose way of looking at things, in that someone in the class may have someone close to them who is grieving, but this also may be useful to show that we all have different ways that will support us when we're grieving. And whilst we might not be going through grief at the moment, these 2 slides here will help someone to know, okay, if I were to be going through a grief period, what might help me? So again, using distance learning to explain the different processes and ideas that may be helpful. We also look at human life cycles, and that isn't necessarily to do with death. This could be things like that have a huge impact on us emotionally, but they're more to do with loss. So that could be the ending of a relationship. Maybe that's a friendship or a romantic or intimate relationship, not just the death of someone close to us. It's really important to see that loss isn't just about death. What's also important is to explore in a little bit more detail the stages of grief, because previously we just looked at stages 1 to 4, and we sort of amalgamated a couple of those stages. But for the older pupils, important, I think, to show the complexity of all of these, and that we might not go through them in a linear pattern. So we may have a bit of denial and then some anger, and then go back to denial into anger, then a bit of bargaining and a bit of back and forth, as I mentioned right at the start. We don't go through this in a very neat straight line. It's also important to share that we may have to end relationships, and we may have to handle this in a way that means a lot of our buttons are pressed, if you like, so that we are finding that it's quite a difficult thing to do. And there are just some other examples of when that might be the case. One of the most important things, as I've mentioned about Jigsaw PSHE lessons, is that we don't shy away from looking at emotional and social skills. Based on the older SEAL stuff, so social and emotional aspects of learning, we very much put into every single lesson something that helps children and young people develop their social and emotional skills. And some really important points here to remember are that we work through our emotions. Now, work's a bit of an unfortunate word. We process our emotions. We definitely, therefore, need to feel our emotions. We can't keep repressing them or suppressing them. And of course, this takes time. This also takes a lot of bravery, some effort, and being very honest with ourselves. It can be a very difficult time. What we know, though, is that we can't rush or force these. And people very much have reported, and as I'm sure you can appreciate, that they don't like to feel rushed or encouraged to feel better when they really don't feel better. It's a fallacy. It doesn't help. And when toxic positivity and bright siding come into these sorts of things, put a smile on your face or turn that frown upside down, not helpful. And I would very much advocate that we don't say these sorts of things to anyone at any time, whether they're bereaved or not. What we also very much advocate is that we can help someone feel better after a particular thing has happened to them. So a particular loss, like a breakup, some suggestions. And again, this is really good for distancing the learning, depersonalizing it. Because what this says is that we could do this for someone else, but we could also do it for ourselves without saying, these are the things that you should do for yourself. And it's suggesting things that could help. It's not saying that these will definitely help. Now, I'd like to pause there because that's sort of the input side of things of how we support children and young people through Jigsaw and the sorts of things that we can expect. Now, this next bit is about what we can do. So I know schools and the people who work within schools are very proactive and like to get stuff done. So this next bit is all about getting stuff done, but most importantly, preparing very mindfully. And when it comes to supporting someone who has been recently bereaved, whatever that might look like, the important thing to offer when we are talking about pastoral care and support is that we are present. And that may mean something as simple as making time to talk or to listen, I think, to the bereaved child. And if there is any silence, then that's okay. It doesn't have to be filled. Just being with someone can really, really support them shoulder to shoulder. It's absolutely crucial to acknowledge all feelings. Children and young people, and actually adults as well, may feel that there's more appropriate emotions and feelings that they could be experiencing rather than the ones that they are. For example, if a child has had a parent who has died, they may feel very, very angry towards that parent. They may acknowledge that that doesn't necessarily feel like the most appropriate thing to say. So then they might just say, I'm sad, or maybe not even acknowledging anything. And whilst we're not here to eke out those emotions from children, we can say things like, it's absolutely to be expected to feel quite angry about this because, and to explain it very simply so that a child can feel like, oh yeah, that may well be expected and it's not so awful if I feel it. In the same way, we can talk about memories of the person. They may well no longer be here, but we can still keep their memories very much alive. And within all of this, I've sort of hidden this within here. This is possibly the most important thing, is not to talk in euphemisms, to use the absolute correct terminology. I think more and more we're getting more used to doing this, but I know in the past people have said when someone has died that they have gone to sleep. And for young children, and in fact for adults as well, that is factually incorrect. But it is also quite confusing, particularly if children struggle for themselves to get to sleep, because they may well feel that they're not going to wake up. So using the correct terminology, much like we would in any relationships and sex education lesson, in health education about puberty, we would use the correct terminology because that is the right thing and most appropriate thing to do in school. It's pedagogically sound. So try to avoid euphemisms if you can. In the same way, give honest answers, but no value judgments. Keep it factual, but not cold. Warm factual, if you possibly can. Involve the bereaved child, be aware of how their behaviour may be changing and accept that it will take time. Involving the bereaved child, I'll come on to a little bit more, but really not to do unto the child, but to involve them. Ask questions and allow them to come to you with their answers. I'm a big fan of policies. As much as they may feel a very dry experience to write and to ratify, they can be a real boon when it comes to a situation where perhaps people in school aren't thinking as clearly because of very uncomfortable feelings. They may well be hijacked by emotions. So if you have a policy, you're completely prepared, and therefore you can be consistent. You've got good practice on which to rely in the event of a death or a loss or any other kind of bereavement. It's a guide for everybody, and it's also a support mechanism for you. Some suggestions for your school policy then. This is where the takeaway that you will get sent if you have signed up for this webinar. Anything from managing the first day after an event to what to do when a child or young person dies, and all kinds of other things. What about terminally ill pupils or staff? What about the death of a much-loved pet? There are no hard and fast rules for this, but there's some suggestions about what you might like to include. Do take care when you're writing this, because this obviously can bring up a lot of emotions. And if you need support, do speak to someone in your school or someone appropriate, perhaps a therapist or a counsellor, to help you with this, if that would be helpful for you. Support for staff is also increasingly and hugely important. We cannot pour from an empty cup. So if any staff are going through a bereavement or a loss, be aware that the same sorts of things may be happening for them. And as I will always say, when it's children or adults, ask them what might be helpful. Rather than saying things like, let me know if you need anything, ask what would be helpful, so that they can tell you what would be helpful rather than making any assumptions. Consider what it might be to have a bit of their workload taken away from them, a bit of time away, what it's going to be like when they return to work, and then any important dates and anniversaries too. Some signposting then, thinking about the types of organisations that can really support schools. The Childhood Bereavement Network, Winston's Wish, up to national charities that can support you, but you may also have more local support, particularly from your educational psychologists. Something that I found really useful is using stories to support children and adults, and Little Parachutes is an organisation that puts together sort of PSHE related books into different themes. So do have a look there if you're of a like mind, and use literature and stories to support people. One of the main things to do, though, in preparation, and using a very sort of preventative way, this is not to prevent bereavement and loss happening, but this is to prevent it being absolutely too awful to bear, is to build some resilience. That is in no way to promote a stiff upper lip or anything awful like that. It's about saying, how can we together, connectedly, as it were, in connection, help to support ourselves and each other. So some of the things that we can do to support people in the times of grief and loss are to invite the whole family into school to talk about the support that they want, rather than what you think they should have. Get used to talking to children about how they're feeling. And whilst that may feel too enormous, if we do it in a small way every single day, then it doesn't feel quite so overwhelming when there are very big feelings. We can talk about the sort of smaller, more inconsequential feelings too. Make sure that pupils who are affected feel involved in school life, rather than say, oh, they won't want to get involved because they have been bereaved. Ask them. And then use positive role models as well. That's not to say, that we use people who never get affected by anything. A positive role model is someone who can demonstrate to children that emotions are a part of life and that they need to be worked through the body. Ask children about their futures. The world does not stop for them, and neither should it, about what's going to happen in the future, and whether they might need any extra support for that now that their special person has gone or has died. And when I say gone, I do mean, left, as it were, to live in a different country or through divorce, separation, that sort of thing. And then talk about life issues outside of formal lessons as well. Rather than making a beeline for children in the corridor, just, maybe sit with them at lunchtime or go into different lessons and be around them and check in with them as much as possible. Always ask. I know I've said this several times now, but always ask for people to choose the support that they would like. And then small things, but really significant things about having a system for letting children out of class for a break. Also adults, to let them out for a break as well. Having a short walk, shaking through the body, things that help that manifestation of emotion work through the body can be incredibly useful. Do obviously look out for any signs of self-harm, but also in some children, not the child who is affected necessarily, though this can happen, but it can be that children who are bereaved will then become bullied by other children. We know enough about bullying behaviour to know that it doesn't just stop there. So we do need to keep an eye out for this. Make sure that you've got really robust links with outside agencies and organisations that can help you, rather than relying on them right in the moment to drop everything and come and help you. It is about preparation and as much mitigation as possible. Be flexible. Not everything's going to go in a neat straight line, obviously, and give as many choices as you are able to enact. And then remembering important anniversaries and dates where possible, not to the point of, that it becomes a great big thing, but ask the person who is affected or the people affected, what would they like? Now, I've shared with you a huge amount of information, and what I'm really keen is that if you have any questions, that you do get in touch with us to ask. That is what we're here for. We absolutely can offer that support. So think about what questions you have and then do send them in to us. We really do love to hear from you. So if you would like to tell us your thoughts, there is a quick survey to complete using this QR code on the screen so that you can share with us what you think, and then we are able to support you a little more if that would be helpful for you. So I very much realised that today's session could have elicited some feelings in you. So please do look after yourselves. Do something that is appropriate for you now. And of course, if you have any questions, do get in touch. Thank you very much for coming.